man saves dying eagle from neck abscess in Canadian Rocky Mountains. The man had been trekking through the rugged terrain of the Canadian Rockies for hours, his boots crunching softly on the cold earth. He had seen many creatures in his time out here: elk grazing, wolves calling in the distance, and bears lumbering through the forest. But today the air felt still. It was a strange silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. Then he spotted it. At first he thought it was a shadow on the ground, but as he moved closer, he realized it was a bird. A large, majestic eagle lying still among the shrubs. The man's heart skipped a beat. Eagles were not creatures that stayed still unless something was terribly wrong. He approached cautiously, noting the way the eagle's wings were tucked tightly against its body. The feathers ruffled and disheveled. Its head hung low and its eyes, usually sharp and bright and wide, were dull. The man knelt beside it, breathing in the cold mountain air. He could see immediately that the bird was in distress. The eagle's neck was swollen and a dark abscess was forming just beneath the skin. It was a large, tender bump that pulsed with each shallow breath the bird took. The man could feel his stomach tighten. He knew what the abscess meant: a deep, painful infection that, if left untreated, would end in death. He reached out gently, his hand hovering near the eagle's neck. The bird didn't flinch or try to fly away. Instead, it sat in place as though it had given up the will to fight. The man's fingers brushed the eagle's soft feathers, and he could feel the heat radiating from its body. The bird's breath was ragged, its wings stiff. The man's heart ached for this creature, alone in the vast wilderness, facing a battle it could not win on its own. There was a quiet desperation in the way the eagle sat, its eyes half-lidded as though waiting for an end. But the man knew better. He couldn't leave it there. There was still a chance. He stood slowly, looking around the vast landscape. The eagle needed help, urgent help. Without hesitation, he reached into his pack, pulling out a first aid kit he kept for his own hiking mishaps. He looked down at the bird once more, then back toward the path he had come from. It would be a long, difficult trek back to the nearest facility, but it was the only chance the eagle had. He kneeled again, moving carefully, his hands shaking slightly. The eagle's eyes followed his movements, not with fear, but with an understanding that felt almost human. The man prepared to move the bird, speaking softly as if the words themselves might offer some comfort in this quiet struggle. "Hold on, friend," he murmured. "I'm not leaving you here." With that, he gently lifted the eagle, cradling its fragile body in his arms, feeling the weight of the creature's life pressing against his chest. The cold wind brushed against his face as he began the long journey back, his every step carrying both the weight of responsibility and the quiet hope that he might just save this magnificent bird. The man moved swiftly through the wilderness, the weight of the eagle pressing softly against his chest. The air was thin in the Canadian Rockies, the chill biting at his skin, but his focus was sharp. His boots crunched against the ground with each step, a rhythmic sound that accompanied his quiet thoughts. The eagle's breath was slow, almost imperceptible, its body nestled in his arms like fragile porcelain. The journey back was treacherous. The path was uneven, filled with jagged rocks and thick underbrush that slowed his pace. The cold wind whipped at his face and the clouds gathered overhead, casting a gray pallor over the landscape. But the man didn't pause. The urgency of the eagle's condition kept his mind sharp and his resolve unshaken. The wound on the bird's neck was growing worse. The abscess had expanded in the short time since he'd found it, the swelling more pronounced. He could feel the heat from the infection seeping through the bird's skin. Every time he shifted the eagle, its head drooped lower, as if it were slipping in and out of consciousness. The man's steps grew more hurried, his breaths heavier with the effort. He had seen these mountains at their best, pristine, breathtaking. But now they felt as if they were closing in on him, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. The thought of losing the eagle, of arriving too late, was a constant ache in his chest. The hours dragged by, the man pausing only to adjust his grip on the bird. Every time he stopped to catch his breath, he checked on the eagle, whispering softly to it as though the sound of his voice could provide some comfort. "You're going to make it. Just a little longer," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if the eagle could hear him. It was the only thing he could think to say. At times, the eagle's breathing seemed to falter. The man would kneel, his arms tight around the bird, waiting for it to steady itself before continuing. The journey felt endless, the landscape stretching before him wild and uncaring, while he carried this fragile creature through it. The minutes blurred into hours. The man's legs ached, his body weary from the strain. He had long since lost track of time, but there was no turning back now. The nearest wildlife rescue center was still miles away, a distant promise that kept him moving. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. At one point, the wind began to pick up. The trees swayed gently, their branches creaking in the gusts. The eagle shifted in his arms, its eyes opening slightly, the faintest glimmer of recognition flickering behind its dull gaze. The man's heart leapt, hope stirring in him once more. The eagle wasn't gone yet. It was still fighting. As they neared the edge of the forest, the terrain became more treacherous. The snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the ground in a soft, silent blanket. The man's breath came in sharp bursts, the cold air stinging his lungs. His hands, though gloved, had grown numb, and the eagle's body was still burning with feverish heat. But despite the worsening weather and his own exhaustion, the man held on. Finally, the long, winding path led him to the outskirts of a small wildlife clinic. The pale light of evening was beginning to stretch across the sky, the first hints of twilight creeping in. He could feel the tension in his muscles start to fade as the sight of help, the hope of intervention, drew nearer. As he reached the door, he gently placed the eagle on the examination table inside. The staff moved quickly, their faces a mixture of relief and concern as they took in the condition of the bird. "Thank you," one of the technicians whispered softly as she began to examine the abscess. The man stepped back, his body heavy with fatigue but his heart still racing, unsure of what would come next. He stood in silence, watching as the team worked to assess the eagle's condition. There was nothing more he could do now, except trust that the bird would get the care it needed. But even as the team moved around him, the man could not shake the feeling of that small, fragile creature in his arms, the quiet trust it had shown him despite its pain. The journey had been long, but it wasn't over yet. The eagle still had a chance, and for that the man was willing to wait, quietly hoping that the worst was behind them. Days passed in a quiet rhythm. The eagle, once weak and unresponsive, slowly regained strength. Its breathing steadied, and the infection in its neck began to heal. Each small sign, a flutter of its wings, a faint call, brought hope. The man visited the clinic daily, his heart lightening with each improvement. The eagle's trust grew and its movements became more assured. By the 5th day, the bird was eating and standing, its body growing stronger with every passing hour. On the day the clinic staff declared the eagle ready for release, the man stood by its enclosure, watching the bird spread its wings for the first time. There was a quiet moment of stillness between them, an unspoken connection that bridged the gap between human and wild. With a gentle touch, he placed the eagle on the snow-covered ground. The bird hesitated for a moment, its eyes meeting his before it spread its wings and took flight. The man watched, heart full as it soared into the vast expanse of the Rockies. He stayed there for a while, watching the eagle vanish into the sky, knowing that the bird had returned to where it belonged. The journey had been long, but it was complete. The eagle was free again, and the man had played his part in its survival.